Meeting of that board to order. Before moving to the agenda, I would like to introduce the members present today who represent the permanent members of the Siting Board. Louis Alexander, alternate of Basil Sagos of the Department of Environmental Conservation. Dr. Elizabeth Lewis-Michael, alternate of Dr. Howard Zucker, Department of Health. Vincent Rabashir, alternate of Howard Zemsky, Empire State Development Corporation. John Williams, alternate of Richard Kaufman, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Secretary Burgess, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda today.
Thank you. So the one item on the agenda and on the regular agenda is case 14F0490, which is the petition of Cassadaga Wind, LLC, for an amendment to the Certificate of Environmental Compatibility and Public Need for the Cassadaga Wind Project, presented by Andrea Servin, Assistant Counsel, Department of Public Service. Brian Asias, Managing Attorney, is available for questions. Andrea, please begin.
Thank you and good afternoon, Chair Rhodes and members of the Siting Board. On January 17, 2018, the New York State Board on Electric Generation, Siting and the Environment approved the first Certificate of Environmental Compatibility and Public Need under Article 10 of the Public Service Law for the Cassadaga Wind Project. The certificate approved with conditions the construction and operation of 48 wind turbines and associated facilities in the towns of Arkwright, Charlotte, and Cherry Creek in Chautauqua County, New York. One of those conditions the Siting Board imposed on the certificate holder was a condition number 147, which in part restricted tree clearing activities related to construction and site preparation from November 1 to April 1, a broad condition designed to protect nesting and roosting bats. On January 11, 2019, Energy, the new owner of the project, filed a request for an amendment of condition 147 to allow tree clearing outside of the previously approved tree clearing window of November 1 to April 1 in order to begin site preparation to meet certain construction deadlines. The draft order before you today recommends that the amendment be approved subject to specific conditions that would ensure protections for nesting and roosting bats from tree clearing activities outside of the originally approved tree clearing window. In making this recommendation, the draft order relies on the petitioner's statements that there are no known hibernation sites or maternity roost trees of the northern long-eared bat, a threatened species in the state, within a quarter mile of the project, nor is the project within 1.5 miles of the documented summer occurrence. Moreover, the Department of Environmental Conservation staff provided comments on February 12, 2019, confirming that the project area does not contain any identified maternity roost locations for the northern long-eared bat, and thus does not oppose the amendment request. Restrictions, however, should be implemented to protect nesting and roosting bats in the event of an occurrence. These restrictions will include that the certificate holder shall leave uncut all snag and cavity trees, unless their removal is necessary for the protection of human life and property. Snag and cavity trees that must be cleared would only be removed after being observed by an environmental monitor to ensure that no bat activity is present. Further, these unoccupied snag and cavity trees would be removed within 24 hours of observation by the environmental monitor. Second, the certificate holder would leave uncut all known and documented roost trees and any trees within a 150-foot radius of a documented summer occurrence. And third, if any bats are observed flying from a tree or on a tree that has been cut, tree clearing activities within 150 feet of the tree would be suspended, and the DEC wildlife staff would be notified as soon as possible. The certificate holder proposes to have an environmental monitor present on site during all tree clearing activities. If any bat activity is noted, a stop work order would immediately be issued and remain in place until such time as DEC or DPS staff have been consulted and authorize the resumption of work. The draft order conditions the approval of the requested tree clearing amendment on these restrictions being in place. These restrictions are also consistent with DEC guidance on the northern long-eared bat, specifically regarding the requirements for projects that result in a change of land use within northern long-eared bat occupied habitat. It should also be noted that there was a request from the concerned citizens of the Cassadaga Wind Project that was filed this morning, asking that the vote on this amendment be postponed until a thorough investigation of the financial status of Entergy could be performed. The concerned citizens state that they are concerned that ongoing merger actions in the EU with Entergy's parent company, RWE, and possible antitrust action by the EU regulatory bodies could imperil financial viability of this project, and any construction activities should be halted until these merger and antitrust actions have been resolved. The transfer of the certificate from Everpower to Entergy was previously evaluated by the Commission pursuant to Section 70 in Case 18E0333, and no further action is warranted here. If you have any questions, I'm available to answer them.
Thank you, Andrea. My own comment is that this order is well done, with proper consideration of the issues and the evidence, and properly arrives at, sets reasonable and effective conditions. I am going to be in favor of this item. Do any of my fellow board members wish to make comments or ask questions? Seeing and hearing none, I will proceed to call for a vote. My own vote is in favor of the recommendation to amend Certificate Condition 147 as described. Mr. Alexander, how do you vote?
My vote is in favor.
Thank you. Dr. Lewis Michael, how do you vote?
I vote in favor.
Mr. Ravashir, how do you vote?
In favor.
And Mr. Williams, how do you vote?
In favor.
The matter is approved and the recommendation is adopted. Secretary Burgess, is there anything further to come before us today?
There are no further matters today.
Thank you, and thank you, fellow board members, for your service. We are adjourned.